I'd like to welcome you to this training module where we're going to be talking about cash discounting and surcharging. So this is really a general topic module. And what I mean by that is in this module, we're not going to be talking specifically about our programs or which of our programs you should offer or what the competitors offer. All we want to do is we want to describe these topics. So let me kind of frame this a little bit for you, and then we're going to dive into some individual specific videos to make sure you really understand the different options that are out there for merchants. So the idea here is we're trying to pass the cost of processing on to the consumer, both cash discounting and surcharging and non-cash adjustment programs and in-kind incentive programs and service fee programs and all of these different variants that you're going to see. They all have one simple goal in mind, and that is to pass the cost of processing on to the consumer. Now, they all do it in very different ways and to varying degrees, but the idea here is that there's a fundamental problem in our industry, especially here in the US market, and that is business owners are paying, in many cases, too much for card acceptance, okay? So what do I mean by this? Well, if we look at other developed countries, for instance, if you went over right now to the UK and you're like, okay, cool, I'm going to go over to the UK and I'm going to use credit cards over in the UK. Well, what would a business owner pay to accept your card in the UK? What would the interchange fees be over there? Well, the interchange fees over there are regulated, and so they're going to be between 0.2 and 0.3%, depending on if it's a debit card or a credit card. Let me say that again. 0.2 or 0.3%. So if you went over there and you spent $100 using your card in the UK, the business owner would have an interchange cost of between 20 cents and 30 cents. Okay? Now, what does that look like here in the States, here in the US market? Well, what it looks like here is 1.7% is the average interchange. Okay? 1.7. So that $100, when you go over to the UK and you spend that $100, a business owner over there is going to pay between 20 cents and 30 cents in interchange costs to the banks. Here in the States, that $100 transaction is going to cost a business owner around $1.70. $1.70. That is huge. Now, what you might think to yourself is you might think, well, still though, it's only $1.70 and they're getting $100 in revenue. Who cares? Well, what you need to understand is that for many small business owners, their profit margins are very low. They're very small profit margins. So when you go in there and spend $100, they don't get $100 anyway, even without card acceptance. If you go in there and spend $100 in cash, they're still going to have to use a big chunk of that money to pay for their building rent, to pay for their employee payroll, to pay for the electric bill, to pay for their supplies, their cost of goods sold, right? There's all of these other costs that go into running a business. And so when you get $100, it's not like you go, cool, I got $100, I'm just going to pocket all that money. No. We maybe have to take out $60 to pay for whatever it is that we had to buy to give them, right? So maybe it's a restaurant and you go in there and spend $100 on a meal. Well, it might have cost them anywhere from $30 to $50 to buy the food that they prepared to serve to you, right? Well, then they have to pay the people that cook the food. That's another, $7, right? Or whatever, right? Then there's a certain percentage where they have these fixed costs. So a certain percentage of that money, maybe another $4 or $5 is going to go towards the building rent, right? And then they have to pay for the server that comes out and serves the meal. So there's all of these other costs. And so at the end of the day, out of that $100, that restaurant might only have $6 or $7 left over in profit. So if you think about $6 or $7 and say the difference between paying 20 cents and paying $1.70, that's a really big difference. $1.70 out of $6, that's really going to hurt. 20 cents out of $6 is still going to hurt, but obviously it's going to hurt a lot less than $1.70. And this is the case around the world. Now, the UK is really one of the lowest as far as developed countries and their interchange cost, but even in countries like Australia, the interchange costs there are down around 0.5%. In many cases, about 0.5%. In Canada, the interchange costs are significantly lower, about half what they are in the US. And many other developed countries are very similar. A lot of the European countries, they have very low interchange costs. Now, again, that's because of regulation. And so in the US, the interchange fees are, a free market type situation. Okay. So in the US market, our interchange fees are determined by the free market here in the US. And the idea is, what are people willing to pay, without saying, no, that's enough. And so what do we do in the US market with this problem that we have where business owners in the US business owners are at a distinct disadvantage from businesses around the world because of the cost of card acceptance? So what do we do about that? What's the right free market solution for this problem? Well, in a free market, when someone is charging too much for something, what happens is the people that would be paying, they say, no, that's too expensive, right? So if you go to Walmart and you need to buy toilet paper, and you go and you look at, the toilet paper rack, and you're going to get a big thing of toilet paper there, and you see that there's one for $5, there's another one for $4.50, and then you see there's one that's $26, okay? And they're all very similar, okay, in quality and everything, right? Well, what's going to happen is nobody's going to buy the one that's $27, right? That's a free market. Whoever made that toilet paper and wanted to charge $27, they're not going to make any money because nobody's willing to pay 5 times more for their toilet paper than everybody else's. That's how a free market works. So how do we translate that into the payments industry, right? Well, the way we translate that is with these ideas of cash discounting and surcharging, this idea of passing the cost of processing on to the consumer. So for years and years, for decades really, small business owners did not have a choice about this. It really wasn't a pure free market. If a business owner wanted to accept Visa and MasterCard and the other card brands, they had to sign an agreement that stated, we will not pass the cost of processing on to the consumer. That was part of the deal. So they were really just kind of stuck. I mean, whatever the rates were, the rates were. But over the last few years, through different laws that have been passed, through the Supreme Court case, Expressions Hair Design versus the state of New York, some different things have happened that have actually loosened up this regulation. And I'll talk more about that in the following videos. But it's at a point now to where small business owners do have the option to say, no, we're not going to pay to accept these cards. What we're going to do is we are instead going to pass that cost of processing onto the consumer. And so the consumer that's using their card, their debit card or their credit card, depending on the program, they are going to pay a little bit of a higher price. Now that is where all the differences are that are structured differently, which I'll talk about. But at the end of the day, the idea is a consumer that's paying with cash is going to pay less than a consumer paying with a credit card, okay? In some cases, even a debit card, right? So there's going to be these differences there. And the idea is that cash paying customers are going to pay less. So we're passing the cost of processing in one way, one form or another onto the consumer. And now we're letting the consumer decide in a free market. Is it worth you using your card? Are you willing to pay a little bit of a higher rate to be able to use your card? Is the convenience of using your card? Is the reward points of using your card? Is the availability of financing of using your card? Are those benefits, are they worth the cost to the consumer? If not, let the consumer say no. Now we have a free market, right? If the consumer wants to use their card and pay a little bit extra for it, go for it. If the consumer doesn't want to use their card and they recognize, wait a second, I'm going to pay more. I could actually pay less if I paid with cash. I think I'm going to pay with cash. Let the consumer decide that. Give the consumer the power of choice. So to that end, our industry has come up with primarily 2 approaches to this problem and solving this problem and creating programs. There's 2 different approaches: surcharging and cash discounting. We're going to cover each of those coming up in the next few videos.